Hi, I'm Ophelia at Learnable, and today we're talking to Alex Walker and Brad Barrow. Alex, I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Alex, and I'm working on the front end at Learnable and at SitePoint for a number of years.
And Brad, what about you?
The same. I'm also a front-end developer, and I work at Flipper.
Great. Today we're talking about Foundation and Bootstrap. Alex, can you take us across a little bit of the history and the differences there between the two?
Let me see, okay. Bootstrap is a project that came out of Twitter. It's fundamentally a grid-based CSS system for laying out pages. As you can imagine, with the popularity of Twitter and the focus that anything that they do gets when it gets put onto GitHub, it gained a popularity quite quickly. And it also came along at a time when a lot of frameworks like 960, Grid System and Blueprint and a few of the other big players in that market were starting to become a little bit on the nose in the way that they were built. So it gained a lot of popularity quite quickly. Zerb came along with at about the same time with a new framework called Foundation, which they built in-house and then open source. It's like on the MIT licensing system, which means you can do whatever you like with it. And it's the central sort of part of a lot of the products that they build. They build prototyping tools and user testing tools, and Foundation is at the core of that system. I think that's probably that covers the main sort of part of them both.
And Brad, which came first, Foundation or Bootstrap?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a debate around that subject. So Bootstrap obviously came out of the Twitter project. They had a number of sort of little mini apps which were full of different frameworks, different CSS styles and approaches. And during a hackathon week, Twitter's developers actually built Bootstrap. Zerb, on the other hand, has a style guide that they use in-house, and that style guide just got bigger and bigger and bigger until they decided to actually take some time and polish it into what has become Foundation today. There's a bit of contention around the fact that perhaps because there were a couple of Zerb developers working at Bootstrap, at Twitter at the time that they developed Bootstrap, that perhaps some of Zerb's ideas were kind of involved in Bootstrap. So whilst Bootstrap was actually released first as a framework, some people say that Zerb was actually the forerunner here. So,
And who should be using which one? What are the main differences?
I think it comes down to personal preference a lot of the time. Both the frameworks, they're built for a similar purpose. One, Bootstrap is written in Less, and Foundation is written in Sass, which are both precompiled CSS languages. So if you're more familiar with one of those, then that might sway your decision. Although, in my opinion, I think that Bootstrap is more suited to rapid prototyping. It has a large component library, so you can very easily just whip up a demo site or a simple product site using their pre-built components. Foundation, on the other hand, kind of focuses on being able to create your own framework. So it's kind of more of a foundation for your CSS framework of your application or your site, rather than a foundation for the site itself. So if you're looking to build a large, complex app and you need to organize your CSS, then Foundation is probably the one for you. If you want something quick, Bootstrap.
Yeah, I feel like Bootstrap is a little bit like WordPress in some ways, in that there's a massive community and there are tools and themes by the absolute truckload, and almost one of the problems with Bootstrap can sometimes be just finding the thing that you need. There's probably something that you need that's already built in Bootstrap, a theme or a tool that already uses it. There are front end like GUI type tools that allow you to build Bootstrap directly onto a browser, but you'll spend a long time Googling and trying things and downloading them. By comparison, Zerb have kept the Foundation community and the docs and everything around that pretty sharp and focused, and kind of tried to keep things fairly stripped down compared to the sort of the universe that's kind of evolved around Bootstrap.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that in Bootstrap's latest release, Bootstrap 3, they've actually separated their theme, as they call it now, from their base CSS. So before, Bootstrap had quite an opinionated look and feel. But now they've tried to step away from that, so you can actually just use their core grids and components and leave the Bootstrap look and feel off to the side. But as Alex said, it's kind of hard to get away from that massive community that's already built itself up.
Learnable and SitePoint both recently switched to Foundation. Learnable used to be on Bootstrap, and so what's the story there, and why did we choose Foundation?
That comes down a lot to a timing issue with us. We were looking from around sort of April this year to redevelop the site, and the mobile version was going to be a massive focus. We really needed to sort of lift our game in that department. And at the time, there was a release candidate for Bootstrap, but the current version of Bootstrap was certainly, it was responsive, but there's a style of, or a pattern for responsive development called mobile first. And that's a method that is generally believed to be the way to go now with responsive design, which is to make the native state of any page designed to render perfectly on a phone. And then as you expand the device and the screen that you're on, you start using media queries to build up the design and expand it for a larger device rather than the other way around, which is the way that most responsive designs were done originally, and it's the way that Bootstrap was handling responsive design at the time. So at that stage, I think it was almost a no-brainer to choose Foundation. It had been mobile first, and it really probably had maybe, I think, probably 5 or 6 serious advantages over Bootstrap. I think it was August this year, Bootstrap stepped up to its version 3, and most of those advantages that Foundation had have now been sort of normalized and brought back to the field. So it's no longer quite as clear cut. I think if we were starting from scratch now, I think I'd still probably go with Foundation, because I feel like the underlying structures and tools underneath the surface of Foundation are a little bit more maybe just sort of open and easier to get your head around. It's got really good documentation, and just having that sort of clean lack of the rigmarole that's around Bootstrap is actually kind of an advantage, I think, after a while. But the other thing is also that even when Bootstrap was released in August, we're a SaaS, we sort of favour SaaS, and it comes out as a less product originally, and then there are ports that are written over to SaaS, and they'll generally trail a little bit behind, and every time there's a change made, there's a pipeline that things have to go along to get down to that SaaS version. So whereas Foundation is SaaS from the start, so anything that's done in Foundation becomes a SaaS thing immediately. So that was kind of important to us from day one.
Brad, what about at Flipper? What do you guys use?
So Flipper, as it stands, is not actually on a framework, but what we're doing is we're slowly migrating to Bootstrap. We're actually bringing it in progressively rather than just, in one big go moving to Bootstrap. Why did we choose Bootstrap? Mainly because we already implemented quite a few of its components. We use AngularJS on our front end, and we use a third-party library called Angular UI, which relies on Bootstrap styling. So we thought, we could move to Foundation, but that means we would then have to style all of those components again to match Foundation. But we could just use Bootstrap. And as we said earlier, the differences as far as a structural language goes, they're quite similar. I do agree with Alex that SaaS is preferable. So we are actually using one of those ports, so to speak. It's a Ruby gem, which keeps the Bootstrap SaaS conversion up to date. So it's working for us so far, and I think we're pretty happy with our decision. At a personal level, I would probably choose Foundation, but you have to make decisions for what you're working on. So. Yeah.
So Alex and Brad, you've outlined the pros and cons of both Foundation and Bootstrap, and so far it really sounds like it depends on what kind of developer you are and what languages you're most comfortable with. If we're looking ahead to the next year, which one makes the most sense? Say you're advising a new developer on which framework they should opt for. Which one would you say, Brad?
So my default response would have been Foundation. That being said, Bootstrap 3 has come a long way in catching up to what the sort of standard the foundation is set up. I still think I'd probably go with foundation. I just prefer their documentation. You know, as Alex has said, there's less distraction with all those themes and, you know, communities around Bootstrap. It's just leaner and meaner. It's easier to get started with. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I'd certainly be leaning towards foundation. We're at a moment in time where there's almost feature parity between the two, and there are a few little just differences. Things like block grid in foundation, some people particularly like, and there are some different sort of features that might suit a particular site. Let's say you were doing a gallery, block grid might be something that's particularly useful to you. But in general, I feel like even though Bootstrap is pulled alongside in terms of its feature development, it took almost a year for Bootstrap to come back to that feature parity. And I think this week we're expecting Foundation 5 to be released. So I get the impression that the Zerb guys are really keen to just be setting the agenda on what a really good CSS framework is all about. So as these new styles and new themes become apparent, I think that you're going to see them in Foundation generally before they get through to Bootstrap, and I think that's a pretty important thing. So yeah, I'd be definitely saying Foundation for the foreseeable future.
So it sounds like the choice is between lean and mean Foundation and community-backed Bootstrap.
Yeah. Although there's still a significant community behind Foundation, I think it's just more focused, and the Zerb guys, and even the way that they talk at conferences and that kind of stuff, they keep a very strong, consistent message all the way through, and I think that's it's easy to use your time effectively when you're following their stuff. So yeah, I think there's good reasons for both, but Foundation for me.
Yeah, I agree.
So thank you, Brad and Alex, for taking the time to talk, and thank you for watching. If you have any opinions on this, which one do you prefer, Foundation or Bootstrap? Or if you have any questions, Alex and Brad will both be responding in the comments.